Hi, this is Chelsea McPhail, and I'm working Heath today. This is a thoroughbred. He is 11 years old. He raced 50 or more times, I believe. And him and the other horse I'm going to show in training today are both owned by the same person. Her name's Kelly. She sent them to me for training while she is deployed. So I've had them for been just over a month now, and this session was from over the weekend. So this was, maybe their 9th or 10th training session. Actually, Heath was the weekend prior. So yeah, this is maybe his probably his 6th or 7th training session. So you're seeing the very early stages of my work with him. Some considerations to know about him. He has DSLD, which is a degenerative disease of the suspensory ligament in both hind legs. His right hind is a little bit more of an issue than his left hind. So you'll see it's a bit more dropped when he's walking, but he's very sound, and he has been doing well in work. So we're going to keep him moving and keep him fit. He's certainly, a horse that I wouldn't necessarily, his goal is really just to get back in shape and hopefully to teach him to stretch, find a better way of moving in his body. But knowing that he has, an issue with the suspensory ligament in his hind legs, he's not a horse that I would be, thinking about wanting to do, put him in a collected frame. I think for him, stretching and maintaining a working frame is going to be, really our goal for him. He's a big boy. He's over 17 hands. He's got a nice big walk here. And you can see that he's already starting to find the stretch in hand. That's mostly what I've been doing with him, and I'll show you a little bit of the lunging work at the end. I did try him in side reins lunging, and I found that to have them at an effective enough length to help him, stretch down when he hollowed, they were, a bit too short for him to stretch all the way down like you see him doing here. He's done some dressage work and, a little bit of a, a bit of a schoolmaster when it comes to some lower level dressage work. And when I first worked him in hand the very first day, he felt very, very much used to a lot of contact in the reins, and a little bit resistant to feeling comfortable without a lot of contact is basically what I found. That he feels like the kind of horse that he's used to going a certain way, and now that we've kind of opened him up a little bit, he's very much like, I think, finding comfortable moments in the stretch, but also a little bit wondering where he's really supposed to be. And so this inconsistency I find it's very normal with all of the horses I work with, especially at this stage, up and down a little bit. This is definitely his better direction, and you'll see that when we switch sides, that I have to kind of move him off of me a little bit. He likes to be bent to the left. His body's kind of happy like that. So we've just been taking it nice and easy. The other consideration with him to know is that he was just tested for Lyme disease and did have Lyme this past fall. So, as I'm kind of ruling things out and we're getting, making sure that everything's squared away before we really start working, I'm not going to ask a whole lot other than just, some in-hand work. And really the lunging is more just to see, how he does on the lunge line, if he's willing to maintain a stretch without me having to, have, the contact of both reins and using the dressage whip a little bit to help position him at times. So we're not doing a ton of work on the lunge line, but you will see a little bit of that because I have started to incorporate it and just kind of test to see where he is. You see that's a nice stretch for him right there. Those moments are really building, You'll see I do, earlier when I was talking, I did bring him on a small circle to kind of encourage him to stretch again. I do that occasionally with him, but for the most part in this direction. You can see right there, I kind of asked him to move over a little bit, a slight leg yield, and then let him back out to stretch. I do use a small circle to kind of position him in a shoulder four and hopefully getting that inside hind leg to step underneath his body a bit more. And then once he stretches, I let him right back out on a big circle and let him know, he's done a great job, and make sure that that reward feels like very comfortable and I'm not taking any more contact than just the weight of the rein. And so this direction, what I found with him is just that, what we saw with some inconsistency with the stretching the other direction, which again, I find is very, very normal. This early on, I'm not looking for a consistent stretch. I'm really just looking for him to say, oh yeah, I understand that, if you take a little bit of contact when I try to hollow, that I can, find this stretch and it, feels comfortable and it's nice to be able to let my nose out. So right there, he's kind of on top of me. I just lift my inside rein up and really just pick it up and ask him to move off of me a little bit. But I just want him to basically at this point just understand, this is where I'm going to take a little bit of contact with you, and then this is where you can find, relaxation and a nice big step. And so here I just find going this direction. He will stretch if I take contact, but he's not going to stay down there. He'll stretch and then come right back up. And so we, I spend a lot of time just encouraging him down. You can see I do kind of a smaller circle here. I didn't give him the whole ring quite as much, and we have a lot of space to work in this ring, which is really nice. And so that's why I like with him, I like doing a bit more in-hand work. Right there, he's kind of pushing into me, and instead of, just stretching down, he's really just bobbing his head down and kind of trying to pull the rein away from my hand. So in that corner, I just asked him again to move off me a little bit. A horse like him where he is a little bit one-sided, he likes to go left. I'm not so worried about trying to fix the bend. I'm really just trying to get him to stretch out and, starting to play a little bit with leg yielding to try and encourage that, his inside hind leg starting to step underneath his body. Here I take him on a little bit smaller circle. All that, just the very beginnings of this idea of, just stepping underneath himself a little bit more in order to get that stretch. But I'm not worried about trying to get a bend. I find that once he becomes, a little bit more relaxed, he finds that stretch a lot more comfortable, that the bend will come naturally, from working the leg yield, from working a little bit of, shoulder in eventually, and starting to, use the exercises to help them develop strength and suppleness on either side. So there's no need to, take the bend to the inside here. That will all work itself out. So it's natural to see, a little bit more bobbing, a little bit more inconsistency on the side that he's not as strong on. But overall, I'm just really pleased to see him finding a stretch. Those moments where he does really kind of dive in towards me, that's when I'll take a little bit of that inside rein and ask him just to move his body over a bit. But even at this stage, we might play a little bit occasionally with the idea of some leg yield, but only for a step or two, and I don't want to sacrifice the relaxation too much, where that's really the main goal right now in our training. So as a trainer, one of the things that I've been trying to work on, so right here I ask him again, move over a little bit. The inside hand's just coming up. And then right back down to the stretch. One of my habits that I've been trying to correct a little bit is to walk a little bit more by the horse's shoulder. My tendency is to walk a little bit more in front of the shoulder. And so especially in these training sessions, we're really just working on the walk-in hand. That's one thing I'm trying to be a bit more conscious of. One thing I've also noticed is that I find that my inside hand tends to be a little bit low at times when I'm just, when he comes up above the bit, my hand's a little bit low. And when I'm riding and say he were to come above the bit, normally I would, widen and raise my hands a bit to keep the contact. And it can be easy to try to keep your hand low in the in-hand work to encourage them back down. So that's one thing I noticed when I was watching myself again, is that inside hand tends to be a little bit too low, and as he comes up, I want to maintain contact and at least my hand be at the level of the bit or a little bit higher, but not, get into that habit of trying to use the pressure down with inside rein to encourage him back down into the stretch. So just as far as what I'm kind of trying to be more aware of as a trainer. So here I'm going to show you a little bit of the lunging work. And again, for him, I'm just running the lunge line through the loose ring up over his pole and connecting it to the outside. The side reins definitely worked to encourage him down, but again, even on their longest setting where I was still getting some pressure when he would really hollow, they were too short. He really, when he does put his head down, you can see he really wants to stretch, and he goes down quickly. He kind of bobs his head down when he does find that pressure with my hands in the in-hand work. So it wasn't really working out as well as I would have liked. I didn't want him, trying to stretch and then, popping himself in the mouth with the bit. So I decided to start him lunging in the harder direction, just so that I like to end on a really good note. So knowing that he has a harder direction, I've been starting him in hand, even going right as well, to make sure that I'm spending at least an equal amount of time, if not a little bit more time, as he warms up on that, that harder side. So you can see here, he came out, wanted to just trot right away. I don't mind. He's obviously had a lot of walking, warming up. My goal really wasn't to trot, but trying to get a horse back from a trot, can just cause a little bit more stress to them. And it can teach them that if they trot, they get out of the walk work. They say if I just break into a trot, she'll pull me right up, and I'll get a quick break. So we got his energy out and come back to the walk here. I have him on a smaller circle on the lunge line, much smaller than a 20-meter circle. And that's, in the beginning, I like to be able to walk a little bit more with them. And if I stand still, I can take that pressure a little bit more easily with my rein, my contact. And then when they do stretch and I, can give them that release and that reward, I can kind of walk with them again and give them a bigger circle. So you'll see that oftentimes I start out on a smaller circle, and then as they get stretching, as it becomes more consistent, I'll walk with them to make the circle bigger, but then also I'm close enough that if I need to tap them forward and keep the walk active, I can reach them with a whip. And then with a horse that's nicely active, nicely forward, stretching, let them be a little bit further out in the lunge line, have a much bigger circle to walk with. And here I just let them go to the bathroom. But overall, I'm pretty happy that I can get him on a lunge line, and he still seems to find the stretch when I take a little bit of contact and keep him active. If he wasn't stretching at all, I would not, I might try the lunging every once in a while just to see where we're at, but I would take him back to the work in hand where, I have a lot more ability to put him in a shoulder forward position, to influence his body to stretch more easily. Use a much smaller circle to get the stretch. And to keep the walk active on the lunge line. Oftentimes with a horse that's new with this kind of work, they will break into the trot. So that in-hand work can be so helpful to really developing the stretch. So you can see here he started to really hollow there, so I bring him in a little bit of a smaller circle. He drops his head and stretches a little bit there. And here I'm just maintaining contact, and you can tell, there's definitely contact, and then, the lunge line gets loose. There, the contact comes back as his head comes up. There, the lunge line gets loose. I give my hand forward, walk with him a little bit. So I'm kind of just back and forth, asking him to stretch and then giving him the reward. So the same as I would do with the in-hand work. Again, he's finding the stretch. It's inconsistent. For a horse, this new to the work, I'm thrilled with his work and his progress. And I love that he is relaxed. This work isn't stressful to him. He comes out, he will walk quite a bit on the lunge line. All signs that, as we continue, he's just going to get stronger, and he's going to come out and, continue to become more and more consistent, and hopefully more and more comfortable in his body as well. What I found with him, and it's a little bit hard because the camera isn't giving you a super close-up view of him, but he has a big walk, a big overstep already. But when he does stretch, gets a couple steps in there where his nose is to the ground, and that happened a lot more going left than it does going right. But that he overtracks even more. So he goes from having 1.5 footprints in front of the hoof print from his front foot to 2.5. Nice, like a really big swinging walk. So, already seeing that start to develop is wonderful. And really, that just means his back's lifting and that his hind legs are able to come more and more underneath his body. So at this stage, I know the trot isn't really going to be super helpful for him because, when he does come out, he gets a little bit quick. I don't see him naturally wanting to stretch in the trot. So when I have lunged him since this video session, I mostly stay in the walk, but I have asked for a little bit trot here and there just to see it's something I would test, once a week to see where his comfortability is with maintaining a stretch in the trot. But, for a horse like him who is just starting to find that stretch in the walk, that's the majority of the work I'm going to continue to do with him. Mostly in hand, a bit on the lunge line. And then when I see him, in the trot, start to develop a little bit of a stretch, then we'll do a little bit more of that. But as you can see here, the trot's not looking too bad. But still quite inconsistent. It's a little bit quick. But there you can see, when he does drop his head a little bit, the trot slows. And that's actually nice there for a moment. So you can see he's starting to get the idea of the stretch, and I try to walk with him when he starts to think about it a little bit, take a little bit more contact when he hollows. And here, I wasn't asking for a trot. We ended up, broke into the trot, and, again, rather than trying to just bring him right back to a walk, I'm going to let him trot on a little bit. But for the most part, I don't find this to be as helpful to him developing the muscles I want, and for him to be finding that stretch as the walk work was. And if I was working the trot, I would, bring him on a bit of a smaller circle there. But there he even had a nice moment. So, overall, he is finding the stretch. He's understanding, what to do with the contact, and starting to figure out what the weight of the rein feels like, and feeling his body open up quite a bit with that walk. So here he hasn't really been stretching. He went half the way around the circle without stretching. I would have liked to have taken him on a smaller circle to try and encourage that stretch and get him a little bit in a shoulder forward position with that inside hind leg, tracking a little bit to the outside of that front inside leg. He is looking to the left, bent to the outside. So am I gonna get a real shoulder four here? Probably not, but the smaller circle is at least gonna help encourage that position potentially, and put him on, in a place where finding the stretch is a little bit easier for his body. And just have, kind of walked a little bit more next to him, rather than letting him be all the way out on the end of the lunge line here and not really stretching. And there you can see, found the stretch for a moment. You can see I was walking with him, and then when he came up, I stopped walking, took a little bit more contact with the lunge line. So here's looking a lot better. You know, as I kind of take the contact there with the lunge line, stop walking with him, I'm asking him to come back into a stretch, and then I, loosen the lunge line, walk with him. Again, just really teaching the fundamentals of the contact and the stretch. And again, that was his harder direction, so not surprised that he's a bit inconsistent, that we had some nice moments in the trot, certainly, but certainly and surprisingly, really. I don't usually expect a horse that's, just learning to stretch in the walk to be able to stretch very much in the trot. I find that many get a little bit quick in the trot. They're on the forehand a bit, and so finding the stretch isn't very easy for them until they've developed a little bit of muscle from the stretch and the walk work. So I was pleasantly surprised to see that he is understanding and seeking the stretch a little bit, even in the trot. So here we're just going to finish up with the last direction on the lunge line. And so right off the bat, you can see just a big difference. A lot more consistency. He just seems more comfortable, more relaxed going this direction. So I don't need to work this side as much. But ultimately, I do try to ideally work both sides evenly, and that way, as that longitudinal straightness comes into play and the bending kind of works itself out, he gets more supple in his body, is able to bend both directions. There isn't really a whole lot of need to force it, but certainly working that harder side a little bit, or at least starting off that direction. That way I know I'm at least getting plenty of working on that harder direction. It can be easy to kind of, once they're relaxed and finishing up, not do quite as much work, and you really want to end on a good note when they feel relaxed. So you're certainly seeing that with him finishing up with his easy direction here. So there, I asked him for a little bit of trot. Oh, and the video must have cut out. But basically with Heath, we just finished up on the lunge line, mostly with walking. And as you could see, he was, getting really consistent with that stretch on the left. So this is Colby. She is a 12-year-old quarter horse mare. She's mostly ridden by Kelly's kids. And the first day I took her out, I didn't find that she had much desire to stretch. She's definitely a little bit pokey, and so when we had our first session, I was, one of the things I really want to make sure is that when they are stretching, that it's active. Otherwise, there's not a whole lot of beneficial or benefit to just having them go around with their nose on the ground and shuffling around. And so she was not used to that. So I am pleased to see that she's kind of finding just a more active, natural rhythm here. This session again was just last weekend, so she's now had, a month of training. And the second week she was here, both horses got a chiropractic adjustment, and she went from being kind of looking a bit like Heath, inconsistent with the stretch up and down, to coming out and just really, she feels like butter. She's just very relaxed, very happy to stretch. She found the stretch. This is where she wants to be. So I think it's nice to see two horses that have had the same amount of training with the same person and how different that can look. Some horses come out and they find the stretch and they're like, thank goodness, this feels amazing. Other horses, they can take a while to feel comfortable stretching, for it to feel good in their body. My mare Tia that I, was working the Piaffe in hand when I, before I sold her, she did not want to stretch all the way down. And even after 3 years of doing this work, it was sometimes a challenge to still get her to feel like she was fully relaxed, really finding the deepest stretch for her body. And, this little mare came out and within like 5 sessions dropped her nose to the ground and said, "Oh, I love this. I'm so happy to be here." So they're all different, but she has certainly been a pleasure to work with and has been simple. So there she, her thing is she gets a little bit lazy, and when I tap her forward, she's not used to that. So you see her swish her tail a little bit. Again, even here, you can see as I'm working her, when she's stretching down, I don't always have really the weight of the reins. Sometimes you'll see that the reins look a bit slack, right there especially. You could really see it. And again, in the early stages, to make it really obvious of I'm taking contact, you're hollowing versus, oh, you found the stretch, here's your reward. I won't work as much the weight of the rein as I will, just really giving and allowing them to stretch all the way down. Now that she is finding this contact, or now that she's finding this stretch, I have been taking a little bit of, that floppiness out of the rein and working her more on the weight of the rein, because she's comfortable here and, she has found her reward. So I don't worry about making that, as obvious of, some contact and then no contact. And ideally, we want them to feel like they're seeking our hand when they're stretching. So we don't want to have floppy reins. We do want to have the weight of, the slack taken out of the reins and holding that in our hand ourselves. So with her, I have started to do a little bit of leg yielding with the in-hand work because she is so relaxed. Again, there you can see when I do ask, when she backs off a little bit, gets a little lazy, and I ask her to walk forward, she sucks back, and you can see even her nose comes, behind the vertical. From the videos her owner sent me, she did used to, go a bit behind the vertical. So when I do ask her for even lateral work, my goal is really to keep her stretching and to keep her nose, poking out and that deep stretch happening. the first couple times I asked her for a leg yield, with the work in hand, she didn't. She kind of moved in towards me, didn't seem to really understand what I was asking. Now I find that I don't really, I can kind of just maintain the contact and tap when that inside hind leg comes forward, asking her to kind of step it more, laterally to the outside and more underneath the midline of her belly. And she's able to do that. It certainly looks, she's not actually, crossing her legs and doing really what we would look for in a dressage test as a leg yield. Her shoulders are certainly headed towards the rail and her hindquarters are trailing a bit. But for the very beginning and just, starting to ask, I'm really happy just to see her yield a little bit away from that pressure and to maintain the stretch. I find a lot of horses when they do, like the first couple times they hollow, they're not certain, you lose the momentum and the stretch. So to have her taking a couple steps of leg yield and maintaining the stretch is really wonderful. And here you can see I'm kind of at her shoulder, but a little, maybe even a little bit in front. That's kind of my bad habit of walking a little bit too far forward. And there you can see I just kind of asked her to move her body away from me. I took my inside hand just up and asked that shoulder to go, to head towards the outside and away from me. But what I've found as far as the positioning at the shoulder is that I feel when I'm in the right place and I'm at the shoulder, I really feel like I am riding them from the ground, and it feels like their whole neck and head is out in front of me, much like if I was in the saddle. And so that's really helped me to find my way back to the shoulder and not walk too far forward. And especially with her being a little bit smaller and a little bit pokier, it's a little bit easy for me to end up in front of her and out of position. So again, just something that I'm working on myself and trying to get better at. So where she has a nice stretch and she's really happy to stretch, you don't see me put her on much of a circle. We just kind of go around the outside of the arena. And here you can see me, encouraging her back down into the stretch. And here I did use a circle just to get her to bend around me a little bit and encourage that inside hind leg to step underneath and send her back into a stretch. And you can see she's a little distracted in that corner, but she's coming back down very nicely here. So I'm really, really happy with her work so far. This is, with the majority of horses I work with, this is pretty quickly to come into this amount of consistency in the stretch. She really enjoys it, and I think that's a huge reason why she is so consistent. She's found kind of her happy place, but this is definitely more than I would expect for a horse who's only had, a month of, 3 sessions a week. But it does show what's certainly possible. That's certainly the benefit of working with multiple horses at the same time. Sometimes one horse does take a long time to develop, and having another horse to work with that is a little bit easier definitely helps ensure that you're on the right track. And when you have one horse that it's a little bit more challenging to not question yourself and question whether it's working. She certainly at this point hasn't developed a lot of muscle. This is just her finding a lot of relaxation and that comfort in the stretch. You can see there I'm scratching her shoulder. One of my habits, I talk a lot when I work with horses. Every time I would tell this mare, good girl, she'd pop her head up and look at me like, okay, we're done now, right? So one of the things I've had to do is talk a little bit less with her to not distract her and allow her to stay in the stretch. And so giving her a scratch with that inside rein, my hand that has the inside rein, has worked really well for her. So I have the surcingle on her. I'm not going to use any side reins for lunging. She really didn't need it. The first day I brought her out to lunge her, I did have the side reins connected, and as soon as I I had them attached to the surcingle, and I didn't have them connected yet, and as soon as I started lunging her, she just, same thing, dropped her head to the ground, stayed active, gave me a nice stretch. So I haven't been using side reins, just the lunge line over her head or over her pole. I just have the surcingle attached today so I could put the tracking tag on it and it would track her instead of me while I'm lunging her. So I'm really happy seeing her just come out and stretch right away on the lunge line. Again, she tends to be a little bit pokey, so while, she's stretching and I want to give her a nice big circle, I also have to be aware that I do need to stay a little bit closer to her in case I do need to actually touch her with the lunge whip instead of just getting into the habit of waving it around constantly to encourage her forward. I like to be able to just use the whip when I need it and touch and then be able to put it back down. And she definitely has a fairly short strided walk. She'll kind of step into the front prints with her hind hooves. When she's in a really deep stretch and active, she can actually get, a little bit, those hind legs can kind of cover a little bit more ground, and she can step in front of the hoof prints that her front hooves are making. It gets a little bit of an overtrack. So even, with a smaller quarter horse that doesn't have this, big walk like Heath did that you saw earlier, when she's stretching and active, her walk, even develops quite a bit. So here I send her into a trot. She is, pretty happy to maintain a stretch in the trot. Again, this is more than what I would normally expect from a horse who's only been training, for a month. You can see her trot's a little bit pokey. I don't worry about that right off the bat. When I first send her in a trot, I want her to stay relaxed. So I just kind of slowly start to encourage her step to get a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. She's one that, when I was working her in hand at first, like I said, she tends to be a little bit pokey. If I'd tap her with the whip and she'd ignore it the first time, so I'd, tap her a bit harder, and, she'd kick out a little bit. She doesn't naturally have the inclination to be forward. So you'll see her kind of wringing her tail a little bit, or swishing her tail a little bit as I, use the whip to send her on. She's slightly offended. I let her have a nice big circle here, and you can see she really takes advantage of the stretch on the lunge line here. Certainly not as deep as in hand, but I'm really happy with it to see her stretching down like that. She has some really nice moments like right there. So for a horse that's stretching like this, trotting on the lunge line, I'm certainly going to start doing more of this in her sessions, especially because I do want to increase her fitness. She has been out of work, so we're going to take it slowly, but she's not an overly hot horse where I have to worry about her wanting to just get faster and faster. She has a nice steady rhythm here. This is something that she's been doing a little bit, is just coming in and turning to be done. So I don't make a big deal of it, and I don't think this is like, it's not that she doesn't know how to lunge. She's just kind of testing me. Because again, she's kind of been there, done that as a kid's pony, and I think she's shown a bit as well. So it's not a lack of knowing, but I think, I treat it the same way I would if the horse was getting used to lunging. My own thoroughbred, who is 5, you'll probably start seeing some submissions of him when I start bringing him into work. I've kind of very slowly started teaching him how to lunge, and we don't have a nice round pen to use to give us sides, so I have to take it really slowly with him, but he does the same thing. He turns in to look because he doesn't really understand that he's supposed to be walking forward. And again, all I do is, make sure I pick up the slack out of the lunge line and then calmly send them back out. So here, I don't know if I let her in. Let's see oh yeah. So she's all done, but you'll see it going the other direction. I believe she does it to me. I just reposition myself and then send them back out on the lunge line. So I don't make a big fuss. I don't try to, get her turned by sending her on with the lunge line or sending her on with the lunge whip and make a fuss. We just keep it really quiet, relaxed, and go back out. So we're going to change directions here. And again, she's not a super one-sided horse, so she doesn't have a really good direction or a bad direction. So you see she's fairly consistent both directions, just like she was in the in-hand work. And part of her desire to turn in while she's at the walk is, I find that a lot of horses that aren't trained, in this way with like art to ride training, they don't do a lot of walking on the lunge line. They kind of go out, trot, canter, switch directions, trot, canter, walk, and as soon as they walk, they're done. So that could be part of what she thinks, when we're walking, like, hey, am I done yet? Am I done yet? And looking at me to turn in, because she's, she's not doing it at the trot. It's just in the walk. So here you can see she turns in on me, and I'm just trying to make sure she doesn't step on the lunge line. She doesn't make a big fuss here, and just go back out. And that's how I'll continue to treat it, every time she turns in, just send her back out. You can see here, because she's, turned in a couple times on me now, I keep the circle a little bit smaller. Just so I can, keep encouraging her forward, kind of walk with her. With my own horse that let's see, she turns in again, not a big deal. Get myself collected, get back to the other side of her, and then she goes right back out. So with my horse Sam that I'm starting to teach to lunge, I stay fairly close to him, so that there's not, a big space between the two of us while we're lunging, and just bring him out to walk. There again, she thought she wanted to come in. I was a little bit more on top of it, so I was able to catch her, just sit, encourage her forward again. And she breaks into a trot. So I send her on a little bit here. She's finding a nice stretch. And this amount of inconsistency, the up and down, doesn't worry me at all. She's working over back enough to me that, we can stay in the trot, keep working the trot. If she was going around and around, hollowed with her head in the air, I would just come back to the walk. But this this is still, getting us in the right direction, building the right muscles. And there she breaks into a canter. Not a big deal. She comes right back on her own, but if she were a horse that was consistently breaking to the canter, I'd send her on, make her work a little bit in the canter. Because some horses, especially, I know she's a little bit on the lazy side. They might use the canter to kind of get out of, doing the work in the trot, because the stretch is, certainly hard work. But she comes right back to the trot. I make the circle a little bit smaller, and you get a little bit of stretching again. That's really nice right there. So her being a little bit more inconsistent in the trot this direction, you can see I kind of shortened up the lunge line a little bit, but I'd probably take her on a little bit of a smaller circle because she keeps kind of, hollowing, especially when she comes into kind of any contact on the lunge line. She seems kind of happy to stretch, but then she, gets going off the circle and finds the contact and hollows. So what I'd like to do probably a little bit more is just bring her on a smaller circle and really put her, into a little bit more of a shoulder 4 positioning to encourage that stretch, because I know she is pretty comfortable in it and she's kind of happy to do it. That's a nice active walk, beautiful stretch, coming back into the walk. And there she kind of looks at me. I tried to send her on, she turned. So again, I just kind of collect myself, get on the correct side of her, and then send her back out into the walk. That's one thing I find, the activity from the trot often does make a nice, beautiful walk when you come back. So even if the trot isn't perfect, asking them for a trot maybe once or twice around can really help activate the walk and get a better stretch. So overall, I'm really happy with both of these horses. Obviously, you can see she's very much taken to the stretch. She's very relaxed. She's able to stay active. All things that, I'm very pleased with, but a little bit surprised. This isn't a horse that I would say would be typical of what I'd expect. But she's really enjoying the work, which is lovely. And Heath, I think, is just going to, as he gets a little bit stronger, he's going to find that that stretch should be a bit more comfortable for him, and I think his consistency will just start to develop. And again, he's a little one-sided, but that will all even out as he continues to work and get strong. So going forward, I'll probably do a little bit more lateral work with her in hand, and we'll start to incorporate the trotting on the lunge line. And then with Heath, just, mostly keeping him in hand and at the walk going forward. Thank you all for watching, and hope to be submitting some more video of these two shortly.